Hi, my name is Kelly Ewing. I'm the State Week Coordinator for the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And I had a question for Mr. Blackham.
Okay.
In regards to the state and private forestry grant that we currently receive, we've learned about the Forest Service plans for redesign of this grant, and we're not very happy about it. They did not include any State Department of Ag offices to give input on this redesign, and I was wondering what NASDA's take was on the whole thing.
Well, I would agree with you that if that's the case, I'm not really familiar with that, and we can have the Forest Service here comment on that, but most state departments of agriculture have a responsibility on weed control. In the state of Utah, we're the lead agency. It's a county responsibility, but we provide the lead on it, and we also provide local grants there on state basis to help the counties get after the work locally. And if they've left out state government, they've surely left out one of the major players. So if that's the case, I guess we can encourage the Forest Service here to modify that and get us back at the table.
And I'm sorry, I missed the question as I was coming up. I did hear the reference to state and private forestry and to redesign.
Do you want to, let's go ahead and re-ask the question if you would please, so that she can hear it, and then maybe a response from the Forest Service as well.
Basically, the background is that with the state and private forestry, the Department of Ag offices were given the monies to distribute on a grant basis to different land managers, and it was just specifically for weeds. Now it's going to be given to the state foresters, and it's going to include all invasive taxa and not just weeds. And I know the Colorado Department of Ag was not consulted, Montana, the entire Western Weed Coordinating Committee is very nervous about this, and rightfully pretty upset about it as well, as we have no inclusion for input on this whole redesign process. And we feel that weeds will take a back seat to the sexier invasives that could be eligible for funding. And we, I was very curious as to what NASDA's stance on it is. I'll be going to National Invasive Weed Awareness Week at the end of February, and we'll be discussing this with Hubbard and Mangold as well with the Forest Health. And I just want a little more input from you guys on this.
Well, let me just comment. The National Association will be meeting here in a couple of weeks, and we'll put that on our agenda in the Natural Resource Committee. But right now, I'm not really aware that we have a particular policy related to that, but we'd share your concern.
Gail, any comment, or do you have any?
Just real quickly, if you're taking it up with Jim Hubbard and Rob Mangold, those are exactly the two guys to take the issue up with. It's not the intent with state and private redesign to exclude people, but rather to come up with a more logical, systematic way that's acceptable to both the administration and to the Hill for the distribution of monies through the state and private, with the state and private programs. But Hubbard and Mangold would absolutely be the right guys to work with.
Okay, next question, please.
I'm Henry Freeberg from University of Tennessee, retired. My question is precipitated by Mr. Gilbert's comments, but really it applies to all of you who are administrators. You mentioned that we're going to have 600 million people. The world will go from 6.5 to 10 billion people, but the 7% of the Earth's surface that's available for us to live on and grow our food is still going to be only 7%, perhaps less if we don't conserve it well. How do we reconcile these pressing problems that many of you alluded to with our political philosophy of freedom for the individual to own land and do whatever the heck he wants to with it, regardless of the future consequences?
That is a great question. Who wants first crack at that? Don, go ahead.
I think you raise a really good point, and I didn't state it very well, but that's exactly part of this land fragmentation problem, is that it's going from ag and rural uses to urban uses. And how do we control that in a society that really protects and appreciates its private property rights? Now, I would take an issue that landowners can do whatever the heck they want to on their land, as long as, that's probably true as long as they do it in the dark at night, I guess. But if it has off-site impacts, it'll come back. And that's where we are with water quality today, is that landowners that are following good conservation plans and good land management, proper management, they have the least risk of contributing to downstream water quality problems and sedimentation. So it is about understanding the land and understanding the potential, the limitations, and treating it according to its needs and managing it to that extent in the best way possible.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Leonard.
Just comment. I think, though, the response of the ag community the last few years in responding to environmental issues shows that agriculture people want to be good stewards of the land. And I think if they're educated and encouraged just a little bit, they respond. So I think that most of these environmental issues that we're concerned about, I think the private sector, landowners, are willing to do it. They just need a little bit of education. That's where Extension needs to expand and continue to participate with us. And research, of course, needs to do their part. And then this education of the public. And I haven't quite figured out that, and I don't think any of us have how to get that out there yet. But combined together, we've got to get out there and start expanding the education of the people so they understand the importance of what agriculture people are doing. And we got like ag in the classroom programs, and we probably need to put more money there. And jointly we need to invest in that. And it's really difficult, I know, for federal agencies to put money into outreach, into communication. But somehow we've got to figure out how to get a stream of flow of resources going in there so we can get into the internet and we can get on the Discovery Channel as mentioned. And we've got to do those things to help the general public understand the independency of their environment to the ag producers and the landowners.
Next question. Dan, I knew you couldn't stand it. Well, bring in the cavalry, Dan. Here we go. I haven't said a word. All right, you lecture. Go ahead.
This question is for Don particularly, and I'd like to have input from many of the others. Several years ago, I set an SRM booth with others at the Denver Livestock Show. Approximately 2/3 of the people who stopped by that, and there were many, had the 5 to 40 acre ranchettes that they recognized were in bad condition and going downhill. They asked, who do we go to get help to help us reseed, weed control, and all the other stuff? And my question then is, with the limited resources all of you have, limited manpower, what is the correct answer to that question? Who do we go to?
Don, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Appreciate that challenging question. But that's one of the things that we're facing with land fragmentation and these folks that are moving out there that don't know anything about the resources they have. They have the ability to damage the resources quicker than the farmers did in the 30s when there was no conservation technology, because back then they were doing it with horses and mules and 1 and 2 bottom plows and that sort of thing. Now they can get out there with a bulldozer in 1 day's time, do more damage than they ever did in a lifetime on the land in the 30s. That's what I was saying. While there's a greater need for this kind of conservation assistance from the governmental agencies as a partner with producers out there in soil and water conservation districts and departments of agriculture and others, the way we're going to have to start doing things differently with those folks is to do it in a group setting, neighborhood settings, community settings at a time, multiple landowners to understand that, particularly in places like Colorado, where the landscape has to be managed as a much larger unit, you cannot just, you may not be able to just manage 40 acres at a time. They need to understand where they're at on the watershed in a larger setting, and try to manage that land in keeping with the natural systems and the ecosystems that were there, if that's their objectives. If they choose to do something else, then they really will know us through a group planning process, and should know us and feel comfortable enough to come back and say, yes, but I don't want to do that. I would like to do this. What about that? And that sort of thing. With the limited resources that we have, and every presidential candidate you hear campaigning is talking about smaller government. We're not fooling ourselves that we'll grow from what we are. So we have to look at these kinds of things to help on a community scale where we can't work necessarily one-on-one because of limited resources.
Greg, Canada, same issue, different setting perhaps. What your thoughts on that question?
Well, Dan, that's a tough question for us, because a few years ago I didn't come to an international meeting because I was busy doing as I was told from the folks that pay my salary, to laying off somewhere around 40 to 45% of the extension staff that I had at that particular point in time. So that, and then the ones that survived, I was asked to shift their core responsibilities away from direct extension, so they weren't available. So that does put us into some sort of a bit of a challenge in our jurisdiction to be available, even if we had the talent that we used to have, to take on that role of providing information sessions, providing guidance, providing web-based tools or understandings for people to chase after, to try and answer some of those basic questions and provide those group settings. I don't know if there's an easy answer for it, but it's certainly gonna leap up and bite us if we can't gain some of those understandings, so that people don't inadvertently, and I believe most of them are doing it inadvertently, change that landscape and may not be able to recover without major investments. Nope, I don't have a good answer for you. I just know it's a problem that we have to address, and we probably do have to do it in a group setting and try and make it available through the internet so that there is some encouragement for people to take a different approach. I have nothing else to offer.
Okay, next question.
Yes, I want to just expand on that previous question. I'm Jerry Jasmine from Casper, Wyoming, where even though we have less population in our entire state than most of you folks have in some of your larger cities, we are still also being affected by a loss of open space. And I want to address this to Mr. Henderson. What would the National Association of Conservation Districts, do you have a vision for how we can start addressing the small acreage issue? And do you see a role for county commissioners in that, in helping provide technical assistance for protecting those resources?
Yes, we're certainly looking at, you said you're from Wyoming, and so you know that Olin was directing a charge towards looking at urban conservation and small acreage conservation. We're in the early stages of planning on that, but we recognize that that's one of the things that has to be addressed in the future, because just as this gentleman said, those are the entities that often aren't aware of where they even go for help, aren't aware that it's available, and like we talked about, NRCS, they talk about getting leaner and meaner, but when it gets down to my house, it means we've got less people to help us. It's kind of a vernacular, but so conservation districts are, I know in our state and many other states, have employees, and that's just going to be an endeavor that we're going to have to partner with the NRCS on and serve that population. There's no question.
Okay, next question.
Bob,
Go ahead.
Chuck Gay, Associate VP for Extension at Utah State University. I might mention to you that I know of at least 30 states that have small acreage teams that have been put together by the state extension services in those states that are multi-agency teams that move across the state holding educational programs on a regular basis. I know in my own state, our team holds about 6 workshops a year with about 100 people attending each workshop. And they're put on by us and the conservation districts, NRCS, the federal agencies, and all of our state agencies as well. It's a great team effort, and I know most states have those teams in place.
Dan, comment, is this something that's rising up on CSRES on your radar screen, or where?
Well, from the agency perspective, we do hear about this frequently, but the reality of it is this is something that takes place at the state level through the Extension Service. At the federal level, I don't think any of us at this table would disagree that there probably is going to be some kind of evolution over time, whether it's going to take 5 years or 20 years. We can't all have agents in the counties, in the field, in the same location that give different kinds of advice to somebody who wants to know how to take care of their 40 acres. Do you go to an extension agent or to someone from NRCS or to somebody from Forest Service or somebody from the state? We're not going to have that luxury in the future. We're going to have to figure out how to do this as a much larger team of people working in localities.
Okay. Another question? Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Thorpe. I'm a rancher from New Mexico, the land of the Lobos. So I'm not talking about the UNM basketball team. My question is for the Fish and Wildlife Service representative. And if you covered this already, I apologize. I was out doing other things. You're probably aware that there's a Mexican wolf program in southeastern New Mexico. It's presently under a scoping review session, and there's planned expansion, as I understand the program, to other parts of the state. As a rancher, I would be concerned that we would expand the wolves without being sure we have an adequate prey base outside of domestic animals, livestock, and our precious animal companions. I hear from ranchers in southeastern New Mexico presently working under the wolf reintroduction program that communication has not been very good between themselves and the Wildlife Service Agency. Perhaps you're aware of this. But in any event, as you go forward, we'd like to get your ideas on how you would like to see communications improved and what incentives can be introduced, carrots rather than sticks, for giving the people on the front lines who live with the many joys of wildlife, but also with the wolf its sometimes sorrows. What incentives can we produce so that they will see value in having all wildlife around their operations and not problems?
Tim?
Well, I will say that in this setting, that's probably the nicest question that I've had on reintroduction of large predators. So I thank you for that. It's a difficult situation. We have a mission and a mandate under the Endangered Species Act to recover species. When you're recovering species that have a significant impact on humans, on livestock populations, how do you balance that out? What we are trying to do with our reintroduction program is we did set that program up under a special provision of the Endangered Species Act where we could, at least to the extent that we can, to deal with direct impacts to released animals up to and including removing the animal. I think we have had some fits and starts in that program, in the communication, in the outreach that we're doing, and so we're doing two things. One is we really are trying to expand our outreach efforts, working cooperatively with the local communities that are directly affected and directly impacted. The other thing that we're looking at is perhaps a different approach to the issue. Historically, the Fish and Wildlife Service has identified a biological need and a biological recovery program, and we've moved forward with that approach. And it's been fairly successful in many situations. But what we're looking at, particularly in that part of the country, is trying to set up a program where there's no way we can avoid some damage. I think there will be some kind of collateral damage, if you will, if you have a large predator and ranging over a large area. You're going to come into contact with livestock and with livestock issues and problems. So we are moving forward to try to develop a program where we can compensate. We haven't been able to do that historically, where we can compensate losses, can look at opportunities to try to level the playing field, if you would, a little bit. I think a lot of our experience over the years is there's a lot of people would appreciate and enjoy wildlife and wildlife opportunities, but there does need to be some way in which we can compensate for losses if they do occur. So I think those two areas that we're looking at right now, and before we expand or enlarge the program there, we're going to have to grapple with, one, the outreach and making sure that the local communities at least are aware of what we're proposing, and then how to deal with that issue. And hopefully we can move it forward so that we'll have an opportunity to have wolves where we want them, and still allow livelihoods to continue.
I certainly appreciate your remarks, and we look forward, the New Mexico producers and others, in visiting with you in the future about this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the panel, and I believe we have response from the presidents of the Society for Range Management, American Forage and Grasslands Council. With that, let's give the panel a round of applause and thank them for their time.